Hello, hello, folks. We are live with a podcast for all seasons. This is season 3, episode 11. And today we're going to be talking about pretty much some alternate DC titles. So we've gone over a lot of the DC Rebirth titles, and specifically, we've kind of covered the major new monthly titles that have dropped since DC's Rebirth has started. And we've tried to do a pretty good job in terms of covering the major titles. Haven't necessarily covered every single one of them. We've tried their best to pretty much get the major hits, the major beats, so that you guys know what's been going on in the DC universe as far as Rebirth is concerned. And in my opinion, it's been going very well. But some of the other things that we haven't touched on really are some of the more minor titles and other things that have come out. And there has been quite a bit. DC's got a lot going on right now. They've got their Hanna-Barbera acquisition. They've had quite a few titles released there with Flintstones and Future Quest and a few others. But one of the biggest things that they've done so far this year has been its DC Imprint Young Animal. And I'm going to be talking about that stuff when we get to it. My co-host, on the other hand, Eric Joseph, is going to be talking a few other titles. So I'm going to let him say hello and get us started. Eric, what's going on?
Hi, Josh, and hi to all our listeners. As you notice, I'm looking a bit more evil now in my default photo for this podcast. That was taken from my Joker cosplay at UmaCon, which I covered for Dark Knight News earlier this month. In case you're wondering, the look was an amalgamation of different Jokers that I used as one cohesive vision, I should say. I had my hair long like Heath Ledger, the makeup from the Arkham Asylum video game, and then the suit from Batman Endgame. So it was kind of me creating my Joker, and thanks go to the lovely Jasmine for such a terrific makeup job. There's a reason why I was the best Joker around. And the secret is I wasn't acting. Anyway, as Josh was alluding to, this month, our original intention was to do a Doctor Strange review episode, but Josh and I have both been booked pretty much every weekend in November, and neither of us have been able to see Doctor Strange, unfortunately. We wanted one of our friends from Culture Junkies to join us for the episode, so he will be joining us if we don't do a straight up Doctor Strange review in the near future. He's going to join us for our best comic book movies of 2016 episode. So we don't want to tell a friend, hey, we're going to bring you on, and then we don't. So we look forward to having some intelligent discussions with him whenever that episode may be. I'm not naming anyone by name because if someone can't do the show and we have to get someone else from their site, you understand. But anyway, this may be our last DC Rebirth type episode. We've been doing roundups on each show since the initiative launched in June because it's been such an exciting time for DC Comics, and it's really rejuvenated their entire line. A lot of people who were even turned off by the New 52 are really digging Rebirth. In fact, when I attended a Marvel vs. DC panel at UmaCon, which was more so a celebration of both publishers, it wasn't people tearing each other's throats out. The moderators asked, what have you guys enjoyed so far, the Civil War II stuff or Rebirth? And most of the crowd said Rebirth. And believe me, there were a lot of Marvel fans there, but it's just people are digging Rebirth a lot right now. So we are going to give our power rankings later in the episode, but what we want to do is discuss a few titles that we haven't talked about much or not at all and have launched in the meanwhile. maybe not even necessarily DC proper. It might be Young Animal, might be Vertigo, but in the end, it's all DC, and they're great titles. I'm going to start us off with one title, then I'll throw it over to Josh, and then we'll go back and forth that way. So we're not yammering on about everything we've been reading. So the first title I'm going to mention, and you're going to say, hey, Eric, this is a bit more mainstream than some of the others you're talking about. I'm actually going to talk about Suicide Squad for a moment, because we technically have not really talked about that book since it launched in August. Yes, there's been a movie, which we reviewed on this show. But when we do our power rankings and stuff, we haven't been mentioning Suicide Squad. And I wanted to take a minute or two just to talk about it. It certainly launched at the right time. I believe they launched the one shot the week the movie came out, and it's basically the same team you have in the movie. Rick Flag, Harley Quinn, Deadshot, Killer Croc, Katana, Enchantress. I believe El Diablo's in there, so on and so forth. Captain Boomerang's been killed. Spoiler alert. That was a few months ago, but it looks like he may be coming back in the Justice League versus Suicide Squad miniseries that starts later in December. It's going to be the first big Rebirth crossover event. And I have found the book to be very entertaining. It's one of the better team-up books from DC right now. Because honestly, Justice League's been a bit too parabolic for my tastes. And when you do Justice League, that should be your flagship title for the publisher. It should be your best book and everything. And Justice League hasn't been that. But Suicide Squad, it has the fun of the movie, and it has a grittiness to it. Jim Lee, of course, knocks it out of the park with the visuals. And had a movie not been made, there's no way Jim Lee would ever be drawing a Suicide Squad book. I think they really did this to get people hooked on a new Suicide Squad title. I don't know if he's going to be on for an arc after this, because while artists tend to be switching arcs in some of these Rebirth titles, he's not solicited for anything else, like beyond number 7 or 8 up through February. So, as we remember, when he kicked off Justice League and the New 52, he was only on for really the first 12 issues or so, I believe. So I kind of think Suicide Squad's going to be a similar situation, but at the same time, I don't want to levy too much of a criticism at a book I'm trying to hype, but the downside of Suicide Squad having Jim Lee as the artist is that it's twice monthly. So, as we all know, Jim Lee historically works at it, I don't want to say at his own pace, but not too quickly. So, having him do a twice monthly title means sometimes it hasn't shipped on time, but to meet deadlines, you'll get sometimes up to 4 inkers. And while it doesn't always make too much of a difference, Jim Lee's art is pretty consistent pencil-wise, but you can tell when you read a book and there are 3-4 inkers, because sometimes things look markedly different. There were some pages, I think, in the most recent Suicide Squad I read, which at the time of this recording would be number 6, and I could tell one inker had a bit of a different style than the rest. So, and then the thing being, there are backup stories that detail maybe the history or something having to do with different members of the squad. And if you can hear, my dog's trying to interject a point, so hopefully you don't hear it too loudly over this recording.
He agrees adamantly. Or she agrees.
Yeah, she. So, where was I? Oh yeah, the backup stories. Usually when you read a backup story, you don't expect more than, what, 6-8 pages. And Suicide Squad, the backup stories are often half the issue. So it's like just when you're getting into that main story, it's like, well, let's take a break. Here's the backup story. Come back in 2 weeks. And it is a bit off-putting, but if the book weren't so damn good, it would probably change my opinion more drastically. But Rob Williams has been crafting a good ongoing there. It's just sometimes I take issue with the way people write Harley Quinn, and for the most part, his Harley Quinn is really good. I can't think of too many instances where she's said something, and I'm like, Harley Quinn would never say that. Because, not to get too sidetracked here, as we know, John Ostrander, the man who created the whole concept of the Suicide Squad, I believe, ran with these books in, I believe, the late 80s. I believe he also created the character of Amanda Waller. He returned to write a one-shot in late August. That was all right, but the slippery slope he was put on is that he was tasked with writing the modern iteration of the Suicide Squad. So it's not necessarily characters other than maybe Captain Boomerang or whatnot that he was writing for in the 80s and stuff. And his Harley Quinn just, as I said, it was a case of stuff you wouldn't necessarily expect to come out of her mouth. It's like, it was more so like, hey, I'm crazy and here's why. Look what I'm doing, and so on. And it just, the dialogue wasn't right for her. Whereas people out listen to the show know how much I love the series by Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Conner, and that for me is Harley Quinn. And I think it is kind of funny when they get a little metatextual with Harley in Suicide Squad. And I think for a couple issues, she was wearing a T-shirt that said Rebirth on it, and that was kind of funny. But it is also kind of odd how we're trying to sync up the timeline where she's running around on Coney Island doing her thing, yet at the same time she's a prisoner in Belle Reve and is a member of the Suicide Squad. I mean, these have to take place at some other point on the timeline, logically. But as comic book fans, we have to suspend our disbelief. That's like, to me, I've always thought, like, say, when you're reading Batman and Detective Comics, you just think that maybe they're different cases. Batman is working around the same time or within months of each other, because there's often not much overlap in there. But anyway, before I let Josh talk about the first title he wants to get into, I'll say, yeah, please check out Suicide Squad, if you will. I don't think the first trade is coming out until it's January, February, or March. I can't remember offhand, but or April or somewhere around that time. But check out any DC comic book from the past few weeks or that's coming out this week. There's a full checklist ad for Rebirth trades coming out for the first 5-6 months of 2017, so you can look at whatever you want to collect in hardcover in the very near future. So, Josh, what do you think these folks should be reading?
Well, I'm going to first talk about the flagship title of the Young Animal imprint, which is none other than Doom Patrol. And then for my next one, I will be talking about a book they should be reading. So first things first, the Young Animal imprint in DC is intended to kind of launch, not only several new titles that are more along kind of the Vertigo line, where they are more mature titles, and that they have a little bit more mature themes as well. They're more off the beaten path. They're off the wall. They're predominantly using characters that are not in the DC mainstream, and ones that have maybe not been around for a very long time or haven't really had any notoriety in the DC proper during the Rebirth, or even the New 52 in some cases. So Doom Patrol is Doom Patrol is really the flagship title of that. It was the biggest one that they were kind of talking about when they started talking about the Young Animal imprint. It's by writer rock star Gerard Way. He's the frontman for My Chemical Romance, and one of the more interesting things that I heard was a quote from Gerard Way where someone asked him what he thought was more difficult, being a rock star or being a writer, and he said definitively that being a writer was infinitely more difficult. I thought that was pretty interesting, but I play a little bit of music, and I write a little bit, and I definitely see what he means. It's music has a certain flow to it, and certain things that sound good together, to the human ear. And when you're writing things to page, it's not as simplistic as that. So I thought that was a really interesting take for someone who, he's got a huge following as far as a musician is concerned, to actually make that claim that it's more difficult. And he actually is doing writing treatments on both Doom Patrol and Keith Carson Has a Cybernetic Eye. And Doom Patrol is like I said, it's a really odd, bizarre, discordant title. It's kind of everything that Young Animal, the imprint Young Animal, wants to be as far as DC is concerned. It's off the beaten path. It's off the wall. It's a little disconnected. It's a little discordant. I didn't particularly love it. I mean, it has a lot of potential. But one of the things that the story did was it introduced a new hero for the Doom Patrol's main leader. And it's a young girl who is an ambulance driver, and you get the idea that she has kind of something going on behind the scenes. She makes some mentions to some really bizarre things, and you don't know if she's just a really weird girl, and or rather whether she's actually just strangely bizarre, or has this huge kind of I guess you could say backstory, for lack of a better way to put it, leading up to her becoming just some mundane ambulance driver. But nonetheless, the book was very, very discordant, and it reminded me of some of the Batman writings and even Doom Patrol stuff that Grant Morrison had done. And one of those things, I believe, is almost intentional. I mean, it makes a lot of sense that Gerard Way would have mimicked himself after Grant Morrison's legendary run on the series. And not a lot of people know about the Doom Patrol because they are one of those groups that's actually kind of off the beaten path. Little known factoid is that there are people who actually say that the X-Men were a ripoff of the Doom Patrol. The Doom Patrol are actually older than the X-Men, and the general gist of their tagline was almost identical. So some people say that Stan Lee may have ripped off the X-Men from the Doom Patrol, although he went in a completely different route, and obviously that has become an inordinately successful thing in and of itself. Doom Patrol has kind of fallen into the ether as far as popular comics are concerned. But when I say that the comic book gets weird, though, I mean it gets really, really weird. Like, Robot Man is having adventures inside of a Euro. Weird. And no, I did not misspeak when I said that. It's a really strange comic, but I will say that it's really well made. Nick Darrington did the art and the primary cover, and his art lends itself to kind of the weird, offbeaten style. It reminds me of art from, say, the series Mad Men. It reminds me of a few other series kind of its kind. You've seen a lot of things that have come out of comic books, various imprints, whether it be IDW, or whether it be Boom Comics, or whether it be even Marvel or DC. It seems like the indie more, or obviously this is DC proper, so we're talking about something that's in the DC universe main. It's just kind of an offshoot of it. As indie as that could be, as independent as that can be, similar to the Vertigo titles, it's still under the DC imprint. But we've seen that art like this and writing like this, it's kind of I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, it's it is also off the beaten path. It's a little more quirky. It's a lot more colorful. The art style is distinctly abstract, and I believe it was Mike Allred who did the Madman series. It reminds me a lot of some of his early art, where it's really bright, it's really colorful. It even has an old, I guess you could say, pop art kind of feel to it. None of which is necessarily a bad thing. Like I said, it lends itself to particular narratives. The comic book Lumberjanes, for example, is a pretty popular one, a pretty popular indie title, and I believe that is under. I cannot remember the imprint, but it's one of those things where its quirky art style lends itself to the actual narrative. And although I do think that the book has its audience, obviously it was very successful for those who had even been to their comic book shop and they didn't see piles of these things sitting on their shelves. Yeah, it's because they sold out, and they sold out fast. It was, there was a couple major covers of this. One of them was the Euro cover, and then or the Gyro cover, if you want to mispronounce it. But the Euro cover, and then they had one that was the entire Doom Patrol team. And one of them, the Euro cover was very sought after for whatever reason. But my point I'm making is that these comic books are selling out and quick. So I believe that the fact that it's obviously found its own audience is indicative that this is the kind of storytelling that people want, and it's the kind of off the beaten path comic books that people have kind of sought after. It's one of the reasons that, although no one's knocking Marvel and DC off of their throne anytime soon as far as the major comic book imprints, they've been losing a lot of sales in the way of indie comics and offbeat comics and things that are not your classic superhero fare. And Doom Patrol definitely falls in that vein. If you like more indie style, quirky, independent comic books, if you like the bright, punchy art styles of some of the comics that I've mentioned, I definitely suggest picking it up. It is a very hard to follow comic book. Like I said, if anyone who's ever read Grant Morrison will tell you that his comic books can be very disconnected. I do feel like it's pushing towards a larger theme, and I'll probably continue reading it. But definitely an unusual and weird comic, and I think that's its intention. I believe that I think to quote Gerard Way, it's gonna get fucking weird. That's a direct quote. So he is not lying about that. It is gonna get fucking weird, and maybe that's a good thing. But Eric, you were also going to talk about, I believe, a Vertigo title, correct?
That is correct, and it is not my favorite Vertigo title at the moment. That honor goes to Frostbite from Joshua Williamson, who is also writing The Flash. But the one I want to talk about is actually The Lost Boys, which I believe is written by Tim Seeley, whom you will know currently doing Nightwing. and drawn by, I hope I say his name right, Scott Godlewski, who drew The Dark and Bloody, which was just an awesome horror mini-series from Vertigo earlier this year, which is out in trade, and I recommend picking that up if you've never read it. But The Lost Boys, I believe it's a 6-issue mini, and it's a direct sequel to the original movie. So I don't know if it disregards the 2 direct DVD sequels that came out within the past decade or so, or if it's just somewhere on the timeline. But sometimes with franchises, people are like, what would have happened if there were a direct sequel that hadn't come out like 20 years later? And the beauty with comic books is you can do that, and you can draw people as how they would have looked in the 80s, such as Corey Feldman. I mean, we've recently seen revivals of Escape from New York, Big Trouble in Little China, and now apparently those 2 comics are crossing over. So I guess Kurt Russell meets Kurt Russell. Maybe I'll have to check that one out at some time. But I'm not really a big fan of the Lost Boys franchise per se. There's a reason why this comic got my attention and why I'm mentioning it. I'll get to that in a moment. But I will say that it does really hit the tone that the original movie had, and does feel like a spiritual successor to it. So if you do love the Lost Boys movie, at least the original, you can hate the second, third all you want. I believe I've seen only the second when it comes to the sequels, but it really is checking out. It's got that Vertigo flair to it. It's more for mature audiences. Scott Godlewski is a very atmospheric artist. His style is a bit more straightforward. It's not too hyper detailed, but when you're reading something that deals more in the horror genre, his style is just a very good fit, and I can see why they got him on this book. But DC sent me the second issue of the book, and what got me wanting to read more is because of the character they involved in this. And it's funny because it's a bit character, and it's the appearance in the Lost Boys movie we all like to joke about. Because from the outset, I never thought this would happen. But when they said there was going to be a Lost Boys comic book, I said on Facebook, this had better include Tim Capello, which, if you're not familiar with his name, he's the muscle man, greased up saxophone player singing I Still Believe at the carnival near the beginning of the film.
Such an obscure reference.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just so hilarious. And
It's
I mean,
so 80s.
Look up other stuff from Tim Capello on YouTube. I mean, he was in a Mad Max video from Tina Turner. He used to play live with her. There's even a hilarious video of someone interviewing him at a con within the past few years. And the guy was cosplaying as Bennett from Commando, which is one of the most hilarious cosplays I've ever seen. But he's talking to Tim Capello about what he still believes in. And then at the end, they show Tim Capello perform I Still Believe live at the con, and he's wearing like a pair of jeans with a cod piece over them, and it's just so hilarious. But I'm going to kind of spoil the end of the issue number 2 of The Lost Boys for you, in the sense that I'm really hoping this isn't just an Easter egg or a shout out to him, and that it looks like he's going to be a crucial character going forward. You see some internal dialogue of a man talking about how he believes in a positive future for us all, yada yada yada. He gets out the oil. He's about to oil his chest. He reaches for the saxophone, and the closing page is Tim Capello playing his saxophone, and his character is called the Believer. So I'm wondering, is he actually a vampire hunter, and we never knew it from the movie? And that just the fact that he could be going forward as a major character is why I recommend everyone check out this comic book.
It is the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my entire life, and it's so funny.
Now, if he can make a vampire's head explode with a jazzy saxophone tune, that would just that would make this an Eisner winner, I'd say.
I would buy every issue of that comic book I could find.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get to read issue #1, but I'm pretty sure from what I've read around comic book sites that issue #2 is his first appearance in the series. So even if you're just a Tim Capello fan, because I know there are millions of you out there, you pick up issue #2 if you can still find it at your comic shop, or if you can download it from Read DC Entertainment or something, or if you just want to wait for the trade. But before I let Josh talk about his second title, I just want to give a brief shout out to Vigilante Southland. Issue #2 came out this past week, and I just wanted to give it a brief mention because there aren't enough comic books featuring adult babies. I mean, give the masses what they want. There's like some guy in a diaper, getting whipped by a dominatrix or something. But yeah, we don't have enough like older fat guys in diapers in comic books, and we really need more of that. We need more of them in movies.
These ain't your daddy's comic books.
Yeah. But we need zombie adult babies in Resident Evil games. Yeah.
Get out of here. All right. So I'm gonna move on with my actual next title while Eric goes into inanity. The next one I'm going to be talking about is another Young Animal imprint title, and that is maybe one of my absolute favorite names for a title, and it's Cave Carson Has a Cybernetic Eye. If that is not a spectacular name of anything, I don't know what is. But Cave Carson has a cybernetic eye. So it is another comic book brought to us by, it's written by John Rivera and Gerard Way, and art by Michael Avon Oeming. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And interestingly enough, there was a couple variants by Bill Sienkiewicz, who's a pretty famed comic book artist, and Matt Wagner. Sienkiewicz. I'm sorry I didn't do the whatever Hungarian pronunciation. So Matt Wagner also did some alternate covers for that as well. But I would say that this is actually I'm gonna guess this is gonna be the title to look out for in the Young Animal imprint, and that's for a couple reasons. So the first reason is it's a much more it's a much more clear narrative, and it's a much more linear narrative. So for those who don't enjoy the Grant Morrison style all over the map, and then finally coming to some type of conclusion, or some type of eventual and inevitable yet significantly prolonged conclusion, I think that the Cave Carson series will probably be more for you. So they do introduce a few things in the comic book, and the Cave Carson character, I was not intimately familiar with him, although I believe that I had read some of his stuff before. He was first introduced way back in the 1960s in Brave and Bold #31. And the only thing that we really know about Cave Carson in this iteration of the comic book is that a few things have changed in his life. Specifically, his wife has recently died. Because of it, his daughter and him are estranged. And in the near recent present, it would seem, he somehow got endowed with a cybernetic eye. And it seems like a really, really strange thing to throw on a character who is supposed to be a little bit more grounded in reality. Although his adventures have always been fantastical, Cave Carson and his cave crew, or his mole men, or whatever you want to call them, They have always been just basically geologists and spelunkers, and they explored the great depths underneath the earth. And obviously when comics kind of went the way of, well, no, let's push space exploration, no one gives a shit about this journey to the center of the earth nonsense. Cave Carson and his crew kind of went out of popularity. Oddly enough, both of them came from were offshoots of the Challengers of the Unknown, the more famous Challengers of the Unknown. And of the two that offshoots of that comic book was Cave Carson and Rip Hunter, which people will know from DC's Legends of Tomorrow. Rip Hunter obviously had a lot more notoriety and import to the DC comics as a whole, and naturally you could see why. A time traveler is going to have a lot more to say and do than someone who just essentially digs in the earth. But the thing that I do like about Mr. Calvin Cave Carson is the fact that he's very pragmatic. They show him as being highly intelligent. He's an extraordinary at his job, I guess, which is primarily a geologist, but also because he is constantly coming across things that no one has ever seen or experienced before. He's somewhat of a specialist when it comes to describing the unknown, and discovering the unknown, and kind of helping other heroes break down things that they may not understand. So when you need the scientist on your crew, Cave Carson is one of them. But the introduction of the Cybernetic Eye is a highly interesting aspect of the character, and the reason is he has the Cybernetic Eye. He doesn't like to talk about it, but apparently it's just constantly scanning his environment for new information, and he knows about pretty much everything that there is to know about that he can physically observe. So an odd interaction between him and his daughter is he sees residue from some cannabis on her hands, as well as some residue from alcohol on her shirt, and she is having a hard time coping with the loss of her mother. But he doesn't want to necessarily observe these things. He's not trying to pry into her life, but she knows that he can do it, and he does without even the desire to do it. So he has this unspoken link between his brain and the Cybernetic Eye, and it's a pretty interesting thing. But one other thing, the second reason that I think that the comic book is interesting is not just the linearity and the more cohesive narrative, but it also kind of ties itself into the DC proper. We see subtle references and we see subtle influences of the DC universe proper. So, he makes a mention of like, hey, I helped Superman one time and this, that, and the other. Like he's trying to, legitimize his credentials. And it does legitimize his credentials. I mean, it is some kid who's never heard of, Cave Carson, gonna all of a sudden go, well, yeah, I might pick this up because it's Gerard Way. Absolutely. Are they going to say, hey, this young animal imprint is going to be a little bit more dynamic and unusual, so I'm going to pick this title up? Very possibly. But if they're reading them and they also like DC titles in the proper universe, and they see that it does indeed have some synchronicity to that universe, I think they're going to be more prone to enjoy it a little bit more. I mean, there's a very quick little throwaway reference to DC's Metal Men, and not only the Metal Men, but also their creator, Dr. Will Magnus. And that was just like an interesting little throwaway. The Metal Men actually hadn't even been introduced in the New 52 until very recently, and people had kind of wondered where they went. So the fact that not only is it this more cohesive linear narrative, but it also ties itself into the DC universe proper, I think is going to make Cave Carson perhaps the better of the books. You know, a lot of people who have reviewed the other title that I mentioned, the Doom Patrol, have kind of said that, you know, they really think that Gerard Way kind of has a manic, almost genius to him, and that the book is odd and the book is strange, but it might be with realistic and I would say pragmatic narrative. So these books are definitely worth checking out. If you've got a very limited budget and you are thinking about picking up one of the titles in the new Young Animal imprint, I would actually suggest Cave Carson. It looks like going forward, the mystery of, you know, not only how did he get his cybernetic eye, but what does it mean, and you know, how is that going to change and affect his life? The fact that it's tying into the rest of the DC universe proper, I think that that's going to make it have a little bit more staying power than just you know, kind of a weird offshoot group. I could be wrong on that, but I'd say in the interim, it's maybe going to be the more interesting read presently than eventually having an enjoyable payoff. But that's it for me for now, Eric. So what else do we want to talk about today?
I just wanted to kind of again evaluate the rankings. What are the best DC books right now? And my 1 and 2 are going to be very close, but again, Action Comics. I can't get enough of that book. It's still one of the DC titles I look forward to reading most each month. Dan Jurgens just knocks it out of the park with each issue. I've said on the show before that it just delivers everything you want in a Superman comic. And an observation I had when reading the most recent issues was that, in a way, it's almost like Superman the Animated Series, where it has all of those characters and qualities, and it doesn't skimp on the action, but it's just so quintessential Superman, and that's what I love about what's going on in action. Then, of course, I mentioned Harley Quinn. That's a title I can't miss an issue of. I really love what Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti do with the book with each issue. It's just so, it's within DC continuity, but it's just so different, but it's in keeping with the character. And I believe I've said it before, those are the authors that made me fall in love with the character in the first place. But that's a story for another day. As far as the Batman titles go, but before I get there, I'll just say I'll place Green Arrow over the Batman titles proper. Green Arrow is just still a phenomenal book. It hit a bit of a snag, but the last couple issues really got it on track. The Batman titles, Batman itself, I want to keep reading it. Let me rephrase that in the interest of grammar. It's because when you read the Batman title right now, although Detective, quote unquote, killed off Tim Drake a few months back, but he's alive somewhere, it feels like the definitive stuff is more so happening in Batman, even though it's a bit parabolic issue to issue. And we're all wondering what the hell's going on with Catwoman right now. But I don't want to say I'm just reading it to read Batman, because I think I might have said that a month or two ago, but there seems to be some exciting stuff coming up. So I want to see where that goes. And then the art from David Finch and Mikkel John is top drawer. And Detective Comics, it's certainly no slouch, but the second art isn't as good as the first, I would say. Art is phenomenal. James Tynion obviously knows what he's doing with Batman. The Victim Syndicate hasn't grabbed me as much, but we've got Detective 950 coming out in February, so that's going to be a must-own, a must-read. So let's see what the road's like leading up to it. I know in January they're going to be doing like a two-parter Batwoman arc that's going to lead into her new series coming in February. So we'll see how that goes. And Green Lanterns, still loving that. The reason I like that more than Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, which is the one Josh favors, is that because even though Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps is a great book, I feel it deals with a lot of things we're already familiar with, Sinestro, and then pretty soon they're going to be revisiting the Blue Lantern Corps, which needs to happen. But it just feels like over in Green Lanterns, Sam Humphries is just charting more new territory with the mythology, and that's the kind of stuff I want to see. Jeff Johns made a habit of that for 9 years, and with the whole Phantom Lantern thing going on, and I really love the character of Simon Baz. He's my second favorite Green Lantern behind Hal Jordan, and he was kind of so-so before, but I think Sam Humphries has really given him a lot of personality that maybe I don't want to say lacked before, but for me, Simon Baz is one of the breakout characters of Rebirth, and he really makes that book for me. And then he's from Dearborn, Michigan, so if you're a Detroit guy like Josh and I are, you have that connect. So that's a cool element. And the last thing I want to mention is, since Josh he was talking so much about Young Animal, Mother Panic. Check it out if you want yet another Bat title to read. It takes place within DC Universe proper. I believe he shows up here and there, but it's still very much Mother Panic's book, but it's a mature rated title, so you're going to get the F words and stuff that you wouldn't get over in Batman or Detective, but do give it a look. So Josh, what are aside from what you've just talked about, what are DC's best books right now in your view?
Yeah, our lists are going to be pretty similar. I've actually thought that the Superman proper title has been very good as well. Action Comics has also been knocking it out of the park. I know that, obviously Batman and Detective have been doing well, and people want to talk about those ones predominantly. But I would say that, Green Arrow has been truly exceptional. It's the biggest, I don't want to say it's the biggest surprise. It's just I think they've taken Green Arrow to the level that they probably should have taken him years ago. And they've just really nailed down all the elements in that character that, and then the story elements that kind of make it. I've really enjoyed Aquaman, actually. I've been a huge Aquaman fan, especially since the new 52 hit. They've just really reinvigorated that character, and they've just kept going forward with that in the Rebirth relaunch. There's been a couple other titles that I have enjoyed, but Batman has been the weaker of the two. But I think Detective may be the strongest. Although Action has been spectacular. I do still like Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps. Green Lanterns is a really good read. There's no questioning that. And like Eric said, the Simon Baz, he was a real throwaway character for me. I thought he was like a diversity hire as far as DC was concerned. And it's like, I don't care. This character's not interesting in any way, shape, or form. They've really kind of changed that up. I felt the same way about Jessica Cruz when they introduced her in the new 52 a while back. I thought, okay, no one really cares about this character, but they are interesting. They dynamically work pretty well together. It's not a perfect book, but it's definitely an interesting book. And I'd say honorable mention would be The Flash. I've enjoyed it quite a bit. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they've done some really interesting things in that book that they haven't really, like Eric had mentioned before, the villain Godspeed. Just, what a perfect name. What a perfect name for a villain. He's absolutely they've really shaken up that book quite a bit from what was already a really good title in the New 52. But I'd say right now it's probably tied between, say, action and detective, and I'd probably have Superman and Batman round that out for number 2 or 3 place, and then I'd probably give it to Green Arrow. I'd say Green Arrow would probably get a higher ranking if I like that character more, as much as I like Batman and Superman. But yeah, DC's Rebirth. I guess the long and short, since this is probably going to be the last month, as Eric stated, that we're really going to be doing, DC Rebirth roundups and whatnot. A good question to ask ourselves, Eric, and I'll just kind of state it first, is your overall take on the Rebirth movement. And I'll say this: I think it's been an exceptional success. I think it's been very well received by people. Obviously, these books are selling extraordinarily well. Just talk to any of your local comic book shop owners and ask them, "Hey, how's DC Rebirth doing?" And they'll tell you. They'll tell you straight up, "Oh, it's doing great." If you look at the comic book sales, any of the charts online, obviously Marvel's not going down anytime soon, but it's been doing so exceptionally well compared to the New 52, that I'd say that it's that in and of itself is an indicator that it's doing extraordinarily well. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the content is good. Sales don't necessarily mean content. I mean, just think of the last blockbuster movie that you thought was absolute garbage, and you'll have yourself the exact same predicament. Now, I think that they actually have had some really great content, some of the best content we've seen in a few years' time. That's no disservice to the New 52 stuff, which a lot of the stuff I did like. There was things that I didn't, but I think that it's been really, really interesting. I think that they have themselves a winning team right now in terms of the cast of books that they've got, and I'd say the placement of these characters in the universe in terms of the way that they play off of one another. I think that the books, are just, they're reaching a stride that I haven't seen in terms of like the cohesiveness of narrative, and some of the quality storytelling in a very long period of time. But if no one has checked out some of the DC Rebirth titles, because they don't know where to start, they don't know which are some of the best titles to pick up, they don't want to feel out of place. Obviously, the Batman and the Action Comics numberings are a pretty big turnoff if you think that you're trying to go in with a new outlook, because they started in the mid 900s. But if you want to have a really good primer for the DC universe, I'd say Detective Comics and Action Comics are a good place to start. I'd also say that if you want to get an idea of the major characters, although Justice League hasn't been the best title, it's a really good primer for getting yourself introduced to this iteration of the Justice League and the DC universe as a whole. And round it out by grabbing another one of those books that we talked about, Arrow, Green Arrow, or perhaps Green Lanterns. I couldn't speak highly enough about the DC Rebirth. What's your thoughts overall, Eric?
As I said earlier, I think it's been a real success. It's reinvigorated the publisher. Having all those number ones in June, and then the subsequent months provided friendly jumping on points for readers, and with it being many titles being twice monthly, now that we're in month 6, it could easily be intimidating if someone wants to jump on now, but something that they're doing that's smart is when they start a new story arc, say in Detective Comics, at the top it has a banner that says The Victim Syndicate Part 1. So if you want to jump on, there's your jumping point. And as I said earlier, the hardcovers collecting the first story arcs of each title are going to start shipping in January, and they're going to do about a half dozen or so per month. In the first month, they're going to knock the obvious ones out of the way, like Batman, Superman, Justice League. I think Wonder Woman, Nightwing is in there, and so on and so forth. And then they're going to be launching a second wave of titles in February, such as Batwoman, Justice League of America, and Super Sons. Still no word on when Earth 2 is going to relaunch, but I believe Earth 2 Society's final issue is in February, so maybe we'll know soon. But Justice League of America is going to, I think, provide a nice alternative if you're not quite liking what's going on in Justice League. It's going to spin out of the events of Justice League versus Suicide Squad. While I believe Batman is still part of the Justice League proper, he's forming a new team that includes Black Canary, Lobo, Vixen, the Ray, Killer Frost, and I believe it's the Ryan Choi Atom. So that's a pretty eclectic team, and I'm interested to see where they go with it. You're going to have Steve Orlando writing, who's been doing great stuff. Over in Supergirl, he proved he can juggle a team dynamic in the Night of the Monster Men crossover in the Batman books. He's been doing good stuff over in Midnighter and Apollo, and I'm looking forward to see what he's going to bring with this book. And then of course you have artwork from Ivan Rice and Joe Prado, who just may be the best 1-2 punch in all of comics, and Josh may agree. We've had the privilege of meeting those two guys at Motor City Comic Con the past few years. Joe Prado more so because he's been there 3 years in a row. But
yeah,
great. Yeah, they're as nice as they are phenomenal artists. So, and anything they draw, you want to pick up. And I think it's no coincidence they're on Justice League of America, because I think DC uses them as some go-to guys for whenever we launch a new series, or even if it's just one issue or a one-shot. It seems like Rice and Prado are some of those artists they know will hook readers when it comes to visuals, and I understand why just looking in it. I think Prado's also been inking Robson Roca's art a bit lately too. So that's about going to do it, what I have to say for Rebirth for the moment. I mean, we'll obviously probably talk new titles in February. So anything you want to say before I bring it home, Josh?
Other than the fact that Big Trouble in Little China / Escape from New York was the #1 selling title in the month of October. Other than that, that's an interesting take. Boom Studios knocking out of the park with that one. Obviously, a lot of nostalgia buys going on there. But no, I think that's it. I think it's as good a place as any to wrap up. Eric, why don't you tell everybody where they can find us, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to do one more episode before the year is out. Of course, we got the Christmas season coming up. I've got several commitments in December, so if we don't do that Doctor Strange review or best comic book movies of 2016 episode, and I really hope we get to, or because we usually do that in January, but it might be December this time, and it usually serves as our season finale. We'll at least try to whip up something before the year is out. So for all the latest Batman news across all forms of media, check out darkknightnews.com. And then for all the latest DC news across all forms of media, check out dccomicsnews.com. And then For our backlog of podcasts and other miscellanea, check out our blog site at multiverseentertainment.wordpress.com. And although it's not affiliated with this podcast, please check out WeGotThisCovered.com, a phenomenal entertainment site I write for. And I'm also doing weekly DC TV roundups over there, at least when there's enough new material per week to cover. We're obviously not going to round up reruns. And then be sure to check out our friends at culturejunkies.net and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/a-podcast for all seasons. So until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.
Yep, thanks for checking us out, and check out all those awesome Rebirth titles. Check out some of Young Animal's interesting imprints, and hopefully you come back and check us out as well. Thanks for joining the show today. Have a good day.